For lesson 17, we're going to estimate sums by rounding and apply to solve measurement word problems. So what this means is that we're going to be estimating today, and whenever you estimate, you round because you're trying to find the closest number, and we're going to be working with sums. So whenever you hear the word sums, you're thinking of addition because the sum is the answer to an addition problem. Okay, so first thing that we're going to be working on today on your piece of paper, just going to take this away because we don't need our whiteboard, is 362 plus 159. So we're going to be working to find out what that actual answer is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase this, and on your piece of paper, I want you to write 362 plus 159. And I want you to go ahead and solve that and find what the actual answer is to that. And then we're going to round and see what is the closest estimate to the actual answer. So go ahead and add 362 plus 159 on your paper. And once you have that answer, you can push play to see if you are correct. Okay, so when you added that together, you should have gotten 521. So what we're going to do now is we're going to round to see what the estimate is for this. Usually whenever I'm estimating a problem, I will solve the answer first, and I will round what the answer is. But we're going to do it a little bit different today, but just by looking at 521. Let's say we wanted to get that to the closest 100. So if we're at 521, we know that's going to be between 500 and 600. So you'd have to ask yourself, is 521 closer to 500 or is it closer to 600? And we know that 521 is closer to 500. So if we were estimating that and we were estimating it to the nearest 100, we would say that it was closest to 500. Now if we were estimating it to the nearest 10, we would look at just the tens place and on. So we would say this is 21. So I know that this is going to be in between 20 and 30. And I know that 21 is closer to 20. So I would say that 521 could also round or estimate to 520. So usually whenever you're going to see one of these types of problems on a test, it will be a multiple choice question. So you'll find the multiple choice answer that is closest to the actual answer. But what we're going to do today, it says what is 362 rounded to the nearest 100, and then we're going to write that next to 362. So now on your piece of paper underneath your problem, I want you to write 362, and then I want you to write 159, and directly below these numbers we're going to write what they rounded to. So we're going to round it to the nearest 100. So if I'm at 362, going back to when we rounded, we know that this is 300, so we know we're going to have 300 as one number, and then one more 100 than 300 is 400. So we have to ask ourselves, what is 362 rounding to? Would it be closer to 300 or would it be closer to 400? So underneath 362 on your paper, I want you to write what it rounds to when you're rounding to the nearest 100. Okay, so hopefully you wrote 400. 362 is closer to 400 than 300. Okay, so now we're going to look at 159, and we're going to round 159 to the nearest 100. So you've got to ask yourself, what two hundreds is 159 going to be between? We know that when we're looking in the hundreds place at 159, you see 100. So we know it's going to be between 100 and then one more 100 from that is 200. So it's going to be between 100 and 200. We know that the halfway point between 100 and 200 is 150, and we can see that 159 is more than 150. So that tells us that 159 is going to be closer to 200 than it would be 100. So underneath 159, you're going to put 200. And so since we have both of these rounded to the nearest 100, what we're going to do is we're going to add them together. So 400 plus 200, which should be fairly simple because you've got a 0 in the ones place and a 0 in the tens place, and you just need to add the 4 and 2 for the hundreds place. So you get 400 plus 200, which is equal to 600. So when we're looking at this, our actual answer to our problem was 521. And when we took 362 and 159 and rounded those to the nearest hundred and then added that, we got 600. So when we're looking at 600 and 521, you can see that by rounding both of our numbers to the nearest hundred and getting 600, that's not very close to 521. So that's why next we're going to try rounding 362 and 159 to the nearest 10 and see if that would get us closer to our actual answer. Okay, so I'm going to put right here that it was equal to 521. We know from rounding 400 or getting 400 and 200, we know that that was equal to 600. So now we're going to take 362 and 159 and we're going to round them to the nearest 10 and see if that will get us closer to 521. So on your piece of paper, just somewhere around here, I want you to round 362 to the nearest 10. So since we're looking at the nearest 10, sometimes it's easier just to mark out what's in the hundreds place and just look at the tens place. So let's just say we're looking at 62. So when we're rounding to the nearest 10, we have to know what two tens this is in between. So since there's a 6 in the tens place, we know it's going to be between 60 and then one more 10 from that is 70. So 62 is going to fall between 60 and 70. So you have to ask yourself, is 62 closer to 60 or 70? And hopefully you're saying that 62 is closer to 60. So on your piece of paper, I want you to write 360 because that's what 362 rounds to. And now we're going to look at 159. We know that we're going to be adding 100 something. So if you want to go ahead and get that, we marked out our 1 in the hundreds place to make it easier when we're rounding to the nearest 10. So you can go ahead and get your 1 down in the hundreds place. And now we're going to look at 59. We know that 59 is going to come between 50 and then one more 10 is 60. So it's going to be closer to either 50 or 60. So I want you to go ahead and round 159 to the nearest 10. It's either going to be 150 or 160. Write that down on your piece of paper. Okay, so hopefully you got that it was 160. So now that we rounded these two numbers to the nearest 10, what we need to do now is add this together. So we know that in our ones place we've got two zeros, so we know that's going to be equal to 0. In our tens place we've got two sixes, and we know that 6 plus 6 is 12, so that means that you're going to have to carry over a 1 in the hundreds place. So if you've got 3 and 1 and 1, that gives us 5. So when we add this together, we get 520. And we can see that 520 is much closer to 521 than 600 was closer to 521. So it really depends on how you're rounding whenever you're estimating. You just want to get the closest amount possible to the actual answer. I use rounding and estimating almost every day. When I go grocery shopping, I estimate. I try to figure out how much I'm going to spend at the store. If something was $4.68, I would have rounded that to $5 because it was closer to $5 than $4. So I'm rounding and estimating lots and lots of times, especially when I grocery shop. So estimating is a really good life skill for you to be able to know. So make sure you're paying attention whenever we're working through the problem set especially. Okay, so we're going to do one more problem before we move on to the problem set. So what I want you to do is to add 255 and 642. If you want to write it long ways using the standard algorithm instead of sideways, you can do that. It's a lot easier to write it long ways. So on your piece of paper, go ahead and solve 255 plus 642 and push play once you have your answer. Okay, so when you add those together, you should have gotten 897. So what we're going to do now is we're going to estimate by rounding to the nearest 10, and we're going to estimate by rounding to the nearest 100 and see which one would get us closer to 897. So on your paper, I want you to write 255, and then I want you to write 642, again, just somewhere to the side, and we're going to round these two numbers to the nearest 100 and to the nearest 10. So I'm going to put H for 100 and T for 10, and we're going to round them to see when we do that if it's closest to 897. Okay, so let's start with the nearest hundreds place. Round 255 to the nearest hundred place, so looking in the hundreds place, and then round 642 to the nearest hundreds place as well. So go ahead and round those two numbers. Once you have those rounded, push play to check your answer. Okay, so 255 rounds to 300, and 642 rounds to 600. Okay, so if I'm taking, and I'm just going to move this over here, if I'm taking these two numbers and I'm adding them together, we're going to do that real fast on our paper. So 300 plus 600 is equal to 900. So let's take a look at when we rounded it to the nearest hundred, we got 900, and the actual answer is 897. So looking at these two numbers, I would say that 900 is very close to 897, because all I would have to do is count on 3 more from 897 to get to 900. So when I rounded to the nearest hundreds place, it got very, very close. So let's try the nearest tens place and see if we get close as well to the actual answer. So when we're rounding to the nearest tens place, sometimes it's easier to take away that number that's in the hundreds place. You're still going to need the number in the hundreds place, but let's just look at the tens place. So 55, rounding that to the nearest 10, putting it with your 2 in the hundreds place, and then rounding 42 to the nearest 10 and putting that next to the 6 in your hundreds place. So go ahead and round these two numbers to the nearest 10. And push play once you have those solved. Okay, so 55 rounded to 60, so 255 rounded to the nearest 10 would be 260. 642 would round to 640 because 42 rounds to 40. So now what we need to do is we need to add these two numbers together, 260 plus 640. So go ahead and get those added together, and let's see what our answer is. So add those together, push play whenever you have that done. Okay, so 0 stays in the ones place. When you add the 6 and the 4, that's 10, so you'd have to put a 0 and then carry over your 1, which would make this then, whoopsie, keep putting the wrong one. That would make that 9. So when you look at these, both of these actually were equal to 900. So that means that either way you rounded, either to the nearest 10 or to the nearest 100, it would have gotten you closest to 897. Okay, so now we're ready to move on to the problem set. So if you want to have that out and ready. Okay, so look at what the number 1 says. It says find the actual sum either on paper or using mental math. So what I'm going to have you do is just take one of the papers, or I mean you don't have to take it out, but it's probably going to be easier for you to take out one of the papers from the front of your binder and work these problems out on your paper, and then put the actual answer on the lines. And then the next part says round each add-end to the nearest 100 and find the estimated sums. So what we're going to do, these numbers are called add-ends. Those are the numbers that you add together. You're going to take this number and this number for each problem, and you're going to round that to the nearest hundreds place, and you're going to put it on these two lines, and you're going to add those two numbers together and see what it equals, because we're trying to see if we can get our estimate close to what the actual answer is. So I'm going to do a few with you, and then I'm going to have you work on some yourself. So let's just look at this first column. And I want you to notice at the bottom of each of these boxes, it says circle the estimated sum that is the closest to its real sum. So we're going to try that with this first one right here. So I would like for you to take out, just go ahead and go to the front of your binder, take out a sheet of paper, take that out of your binder, and then get that beside you so we can work out 451 plus 253. So if you need to pause, go ahead and get that out. Okay, so on your paper you need to have 451 plus 253 written down, and I would like for you to go ahead and add those together. So once you have that added together, you can push play to check your answer. Okay, so you should have gotten that it was 704. So what you're going to do is on this line, where we're adding the actual numbers, you're going to put 704. And then what we're going to do now is round it to the nearest hundred. So we're going to take 451, round that to the nearest hundred, and put it on this line. And then we're going to take 253, round that to the nearest hundred, and put it on this line. Okay, so let's look at 451. When we're rounding to the nearest hundred, we're just looking at the number in the hundreds place. So we see that there are 4 hundreds, so we know we're going to be in between 400 and then one more hundred from 400 is 500. So we know that 451 is going to come between 400 and 500. We just need to know what is it closest to. We know the middle number in between 400 and 500 is 450. This is 451, so this is closer to 500 than it is 400. So on this line, we're going to put 500. And then we're going to look at 253, same thing. We know it's going to be between 200 because there's a 2 in the hundreds place, and then one more hundred from the 200 is 300. So this is going to be between 200 and 300. The middle number between 200 and 300 is 250, and this is 253, so that means it's above the 250 mark. So that tells me that 253 is going to be closer to 300 than it is 200. Okay, so now you need to take your 500 plus your 300 and add those together to get the answer on the line. So we know that our 5 and our 3 together make 8, so that's going to tell us that 500 and 300 make 800. So when you look at the estimated answer and the actual answer, they're very far apart. So we know just from this part that rounding these numbers to the nearest hundred wasn't the best idea. We probably could have done it on the nearest 10 to get a better and closer answer. But like I said, sometimes when you're estimating, you just need to solve the actual problem and then take the actual answer and write what you think it is closest to. So if I were rounding 704 and trying to get the closest estimation for 704, I would say that it would round closer, and I'm just going to put a little star here, to 700. So we may do that on some of the problems today. If the estimated one that we did work on is close to the actual answer, we will circle that because that's what it says down here. It says circle the estimated sum that is closest to its real sum. So this estimated sum was not close to 704, so I'm not going to circle that. That's why I'm going to put a star and put down what the estimated sum that would be closest to the actual answer is, and 700 is very close to 704. So let's go on to 451 and 249. So I just wrote that right here. You will write this on your piece of paper. So I want you to go ahead and solve that and find the answer to that and push play once you have it. Okay, so when you added 451 and 249, you should have gotten that it was equal to 800. So the actual answer for this is 800. So there's not really much estimating that you do with this because it's already an exact hundred. So let's see if we round these numbers to the nearest hundred, if we can also get 800. Okay, so go ahead and round 451 to the nearest hundred and put that down right here. And then round 249 to the nearest hundred and put that right here. And then add those two numbers together and see what you get and see if it is close to 800 or if it's 800. Push play once you have that done. Okay, so 451 rounded to the nearest hundred is 500, and then 249 rounded to the nearest hundred is 200. So when you add 200 and 500 together, you get 700. So 700 is not very close to 800. The actual estimated answer would be 800, and we got that on the actual problem. But when you look at this, if this number was 250, then we would have been able to round that to 300. So if this was just one more, we could have gotten a better estimate. That's why sometimes rounding it to the nearest hundred may not always work, and you may have to round to the nearest 10. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a star next to the 800 right here, and I'd like for you to do the same because that is the actual what the closest estimate would be if you were working on estimating this problem. Okay, so what you're going to do now is you're going to, on your piece of paper, do 448, and you're going to add 249 to that. And once you have that added together, you can push play to check and see if you were correct. Okay, so 448 plus 249 gives you 697. So if you haven't already wrote that on this line, make sure you're putting that on this line. So now what you're going to do is the same thing that we've been doing. Round 448 and 249 to the nearest hundred. Get those on those lines and then add that together to see what the estimated sum was. So go ahead and do that, and once you have that done, you can push play to check your answer. Okay, so 448 rounded to 400 and 249 rounded to 200. So when you take 400 plus 200, you get 600. And you can see that 600 is not close to 697 because that's 97 away. So when we're looking at 697, I want you to ask yourself, what number is 697 closest to? If you were estimating this and you wanted to find the number that was closest to 697, it's definitely not going to be 600. It's going to be 700. So right here on your paper, I would like for you to put 700 so we know what the closest estimate actually is. And once again, this was 249. So if this said 250, we would have been able to round that to 300 instead of 200. And our answer probably would have been 700. So that's why sometimes it's rounding it can make it difficult. So sometimes it's a lot easier just to add the actual numbers together, find the actual answer, and then round it and see what you get to your closest estimate. Okay, so let's move on to B. We're going to do the same steps here in B, and then we're going to do it a little bit different over here in C. So same steps, you're going to take 356 on this one, and you're going to add 161 to that. So if you want to go ahead and get that down on your paper and add that together, and once you have the answer, you can push play to check yours and see if you are correct. Okay, so you should have got 517, so make sure you have that written in the actual answer line. And now we're going to do the same thing that we've been doing. You're going to take 356, round that to the nearest hundred, and you're going to take 161, round that to the nearest hundred, and then add those two together to see what the estimated answer was. So once you have that done, you can push play to check your answer. Okay, so 356 rounded to 400. 161 rounded to 200, so when you add those together you get 600. So once again, 600 is not very close to 517. So what we're going to do is we're going to estimate what the closest answer to 517 would be. And there's two different ways we could do this. We could estimate it rounding to the nearest 100, or we could estimate it rounding to the nearest 10. So when you're looking at 517, you have to ask yourself, is it closer to 500 or is it closer to 600? And we can see right here that it's definitely not closer to 600 because it's 517, and that's closer to 500. So we're going to put 500 right here, and then we're also going to just round it real fast to the nearest 10. So if I'm just looking in the tens place, I've got a 1 and then I've got a 7 in the ones place, so that's 17. So you have to ask yourself, is 17 closer to 10 or 20? And I know if I'm counting by ones, I would just need to add 3 more to 17 to get to 20. So that tells me that 517 is also close to 520. So if you wanted to estimate 517, you could estimate it by saying it's closest to 500 or 520. So what we're going to do now is you're going to add 356 and 148 together. But this time we're not going to work on rounding each number to the nearest hundreds place. We're just going to work on getting the actual answer and figuring out what the best estimate would be just from the actual answer. So on your piece of paper, I want you to go ahead and solve 356 plus 148 and push play once you have that solved. Okay, so when you added 356 and 148, you should have gotten 504. So I hope that you wrote it right here. Okay, so what we're going to do is that we're not going to round them to the nearest hundred. Like I said, we're just going to take 504 and write down what is that closest to. So just since there is no number in the tens place, it's a 0. Well, there is a number, it's just a 0. We're not going to worry about rounding it to the nearest tens place. If there was another number besides 0 in the tens place, we could round it to the nearest tens place. But since there's not, we're just going to round it to the nearest hundreds place. So since there's a 5 in the hundreds place, we know 504 is going to be between 500, and then one more 100 is 600. So you have to ask yourself, is 504 closer to 500 or 600? And so I'm hoping that right here that you're writing 500. So if we were estimating 504, we would say that it is closer to 500. Okay, so I want you to go ahead and add 347 and 149 on your paper. I'm going to write mine over here to this side. And then once you have that added together with the answer, you can push play to check yours. Okay, so when you added 347 and 149 together, you should have gotten 496. So taking a look at 496, since there's a 9 in the tens place, we're just going to worry about rounding it to the nearest 100 because that 9 could round up to 10 anyways and bump up the number in the hundreds place. So just going to look at it and round it to the nearest 100 to see what the estimated answer could be. So since this is 490 something, we know we're going to be closest to the next 100. So when you're looking at 400, all you're asking yourself is what 100 comes next. And we know that 500, write my 5 again, 500 comes next. So that tells us that 496 is closest to 500. Okay, so what I want you to do over here on part C is you're just going to take the actual numbers and you're going to add those together and find the actual answer. So you're going to do that for all 3 on your piece of paper. And then you're going to do what we've been doing here. You're just going to take the actual answer, you're going to put a star right here, and you're going to write down what you think the estimated answer could be. So like for this one, we did it to the nearest 100 and to the nearest 10. Some of those you can do that depending on if there's a number besides 0 or 9 in the tens place. So what I want you to do is get the actual answers for the problem and then write down what is the closest estimate to the actual answer. So I do want you to go ahead and work on these 3 just like we've done these, not these right here, and then push play once you have these 3 done. Okay, so when you added 652 and 158, you should have gotten 810. So when we look at 810, that is closest to 800. 647 plus 158 was equal to 805. That is also closest to 800. And then 647 plus 146 is equal to 793. And 793 is very close to 800 as well. So all of these would have been estimated to the 800. So this problem right here, part B, we are not going to look at. We're going to skip that and go on to the back side. Okay, so we're not going to do all of these steps here. We're going to take the problem, we're going to solve it just like we did on the front, and then we're going to estimate the answer. So let's just look at what number 2 says, and we're just going to not worry about A, B, and C. We will need to use the white space to work our stuff out, but we won't do exactly what it's asking us. So the problem says Janet watched a movie that is 94 minutes long on Friday night, and she watched a movie that is 151 minutes long on Saturday night. So it says that what we're trying to figure out is how much time did she actually spend watching the movie, and then we're going to estimate to see what our rounded answer could be. So what we're going to do on your piece of paper, I want you to write, or on this piece of paper, 151 plus 94, add that together, and once you have that added together, you can push play to see if you are correct. Okay, so 151 plus 94 gives you 245. So now we're just going to take 245 and we're going to estimate that to see about how long she watched the movie. So there's 2 different ways you could do it. You could estimate this by rounding to the nearest 100, or you could estimate it by rounding to the nearest 10. The reason that we're not only doing it to the nearest 100 is because there's not a 0 or a 9 in the tens place. So let's just try both of them. Let's take 245 and let's round that to the nearest 100. So I want you to write that over here. I'm just going to put h equals, I'm going to put t equals because we're going to round it to the nearest 10, and then we're going to round it to the nearest 100. So round 245 to the nearest 100, write it next to that, and then round 245 to the nearest 10 and write next to that. And once you have that done, you can push play. Okay, so 245 to the nearest 100 is 200 minutes, and then 245 to the nearest 10 is 250 minutes. So taking a look at these two numbers, I want you to ask yourself which number is closest to 245. And hopefully you see that 250 is closer to 245, so this would be the best estimate for about how long she watched both movies. So she spent about 250 minutes watching both movies. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing with number 3, just what we did, kind of ignoring what A and B says. So number 3 says, Sadie, a bear at the zoo, weighs 182 kilograms, and then the cub, her cub, weighs 74 kilograms. So we're trying to figure out how much they both weigh, so we're going to add this together. And then I want you to, once you've added these together, I want you to find what the estimated answer would be, so what this would be closest to. So you'll have to look at what the actual answer is and figure out if you need to get that rounding to the nearest 10 or rounding to the nearest 100 to find what the estimated answer is for about how much do both of these animals weigh. So go ahead and do this and then find the estimated answer and push play once you have that done. Okay, so adding the actual numbers up together, you should have gotten 256. If you rounded 256 to the nearest 100 place, you got 300. And if you rounded it to the nearest tens place, you got 260. So the closest answer is 260 because that's closest to 256. So they both weigh about 260 kilograms. Okay, so on the exit ticket, you're going to do what it says, like you're going to add 165 and 245 together. You're going to do that first. A says estimate that to the nearest 10 and then estimate that to the nearest 100. So it's just what we just did. And then I want you to circle either when you estimated it to the nearest 10 or whether you estimated it to the nearest 100. Circle which one of these was closest to the actual answer. And then we're not going to do part C where it says explain why. So if you just do the steps A and B after you solve the actual answer and then circle the one that is closest to the actual answer and bring that to me once you're done.